On the night that was supposed to be all sparkle and celebration, he saw his past walk through the door, carrying 3 babies who had his exact eyes. If you like stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post every day. Continuing. The flight from New York City to Aspen, Colorado, lasted only 40 minutes, but for Ethan Montgomery Cole, every second felt like an eternity. Through the window of the private jet, he watched the familiar landscape approach, the mountains covered in pine and aspen trees, the European-style chalets scattered among them, the lake reflecting the grey late December sky. It was December of 2024, and he was coming home after 365 days of deliberate escape. 365 days since he had destroyed the only good thing he'd ever had in his life. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt and took a deep breath, trying to control the anxiety rising in his chest like boiling water. At 32, he was the heir to a real estate empire that stretched across Colorado's mountain resorts, luxury hotels, ski lodges, and exclusive residential communities for the upper crust. The Montgomery Cole name was engraved on gold plaques at dozens of properties, and his signature moved millions of dollars every month. But none of that mattered when he closed his eyes and remembered what he had lost, what he had abandoned, who he had abandoned. The pilot announced their landing, and Ethan's stomach churned. It wasn't fear of flying, it was the terror of facing the consequences of his choices. For an entire year, he had hidden in Europe, throwing himself into work like a man possessed. He expanded the company to London, Paris, Barcelona. He closed deals other developers only dreamed of. He won international awards for sustainable architecture. He appeared on the cover of 3 business magazines, and he remained empty inside. The town car was waiting for him at the private airport. Edward, the family's driver for over 20 years, greeted him with his usual discretion. "Welcome back, Mr. Cole. How was the trip?" "Too long, Edward. How is everything here?" The older man hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Everything's fine, sir. Your mother is anxious to see you." Ethan caught the hesitation but decided not to press it. During the drive to the family estate in the most exclusive part of Aspen, he observed the changes in the town. New hotels, new restaurants, new developments. Life had gone on without him, as it always does. The Montgomery estate stood majestically atop a hill, surrounded by impeccably manicured gardens and a panoramic view of the mountains. It was where 3 generations of his family had grown up, each adding a new wing, a modern renovation, a personal touch. Ethan had spent his childhood running through the marble hallways, his adolescence questioning the weight of his last name, and his youth trying to prove he was more than just a spoiled heir. It was also in that house that he met Helen Carter. Helen. The name still caused a physical pang in his chest. She had come into his life 3 years earlier, hired as a landscape architect to redesign the estate's gardens. She was from a middle-class family in Glenwood Springs, a graduate of CU Boulder's architecture program, with specializations she'd paid for by working 3 jobs at once. When she first set foot on the property, with her worn leather portfolio and her carefully organized plans, Ethan thought she was just another efficient professional who would do her job and disappear. He never imagined she would completely redefine everything he thought he knew about himself. Helen was 28, with light brown hair that shone gold in the afternoon sun, and honey-colored eyes that seemed to see right through the social masks he'd learned to wear since childhood. She was smart in a way that intimidated him, not just academically but emotionally. She questioned his decisions, challenged his certainties, laughed at his bad jokes, and cried when he told her about the pressure of carrying the family's expectations. Their relationship grew slowly, between walks through the gardens she was redesigning and dinners on the veranda overlooking the mountains. Helen wasn't impressed by his family's money or status. She was genuinely happy when he told her about a social project he was developing, but grew concerned when she noticed he was sacrificing himself to please his father. Robert Montgomery Cole was a 60-year-old man who had built an empire from nothing but had never learned to express affection without strings attached. For him, love was synonymous with performance. Approval had to be earned daily through results, numbers, tangible achievements. Ethan grew up believing he was loved for his accomplishments, not for who he was. It was Helen who made him realize how toxic that was. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," she would say, holding him on the veranda after another argument with Robert about quarterly goals. "You are already enough." Enough. The word sounded foreign to someone who had spent his entire life trying to be extraordinary. For 2.5 years, they built something solid. Helen moved into an apartment downtown to be closer, but she maintained her professional independence. She took jobs all over the region, building her own reputation that owed nothing to the Montgomery name. Ethan, in turn, began to question family patterns he had never thought to challenge. They started talking about marriage, about kids, about a life they would build together based on conscious choices, not just inherited traditions. That's when the panic set in. The first anxiety attack came one March morning when Helen casually mentioned she'd visited a bridal shop with a friend. Nothing serious, just browsing. But something inside Ethan shattered. His chest tightened, his breathing grew difficult, and he had to run out to the garden just to catch his breath. Helen was worried. She suggested therapy. She said there was no rush for anything, that they could go at whatever pace he felt comfortable with, but Ethan couldn't explain what was happening. How could he say that the idea of happiness terrified him? How could he admit he was afraid that if she truly knew him, she'd discover he didn't deserve to be loved? The attacks became more frequent. Arguments erupted out of nowhere. Ethan started traveling more, taking on unnecessary projects in other cities. He created physical distance to avoid the emotional intimacy he both craved and feared. Helen tried to fight for them. She tried to talk, to understand, to help. But Ethan was at war with himself, and she became collateral damage. The last fight had been terrible. Helen, exhausted from trying to reach a man who was constantly running away, said she couldn't take being punished for traumas she hadn't caused. She said she loved him, but that love wasn't enough if he wouldn't let himself be loved back. "I can't compete with your ghosts, Ethan," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You need to decide if you want a real life or if you'd rather keep hiding behind your fear." Ethan looked at her that night, hair disheveled, eyes red, heartbroken, and felt like he was seeing her for the last time. He knew she deserved more. She deserved someone whole, not a man who fell apart every time happiness got too close. "You're right," he said, his voice sounding strange, distant. "Maybe it's better if we end this here." Helen stared at him, as if he'd slapped her. She had expected a lot of things, but not resignation. "That's it? You're not even going to try?" Ethan looked away. If he looked into her eyes, he'd lose the courage to do what he believed was best for her. "I don't want to drag you into a life you'll regret." "Who said I would regret it? You? You've decided for me too?" The silence between them lasted an eternity. Then Helen grabbed her purse, looked at him one last time and said, "When you decide you deserve to be happy, find me if it's not too late." She left the house in the early hours of that June morning, and Ethan never saw her again. The next day he caught a flight to London and spent the next year trying to convince himself he'd done the right thing. Now, 17 months later, he was coming home. Not because he had solved his problems. He still woke up in the middle of the night thinking about her. Not because he had found answers. He still didn't understand why he knew he wanted a life with Helen, but couldn't allow it to happen. He was coming back because his mother, Lucy Montgomery, had insisted he spend Christmas with the family. "You've been running long enough," she'd said over the phone. "Whatever you're running from, you won't solve it by staying away forever." The town car pulled up to the entrance of the estate. Ethan got out slowly, breathing in the cold mountain air. December had always been his favorite time of year. The whole house transformed with Christmas lights, the fireplace always lit, the family gathering for long dinners and conversations that stretched late into the night. But this time something was different. The Christmas decorations were as impeccable as ever. Wreaths on the doors, gigantic trees in the main halls, golden lights that turned the estate into a postcard scene. But there was a tension in the air that Ethan couldn't identify. Martha, the housekeeper, who had known him since he was a baby, opened the main door. Her smile was warm, but there was something forced in her expression. "Mr. Ethan, it's so good to have you back. Your mother is waiting for you in the main living room." He entered the house, taking in the familiar scent of cinnamon and apple that always filled the estate during Christmas. His footsteps echoed on the marble of the foyer, where family portraits bore witness to 4 decades of Montgomery tradition. Lucy was waiting for him in the main living room, elegant as always at 58. She had been a model in her youth before marrying Robert, and she maintained the poised posture that made her imposing even in intimate settings. She wore a navy blue silk dress and a pearl necklace she'd received as a wedding gift. "Ethan," she said, rising to hug him. "My son." The hug lasted longer than usual. Lucy held him as if to make sure he was real, that he had truly come back. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for insisting I come. You needed to come home." She studied him with a mother's eye, noticing the lost weight, the new lines around his eyes. "You're thin, and you look like you haven't slept properly in months." "Work has been intense." "Work?" Lucy sighed. "Your father used that same excuse his whole life. I hope you're smarter than him." Ethan raised his eyebrows. It was rare for his mother to criticize Robert directly, even after nearly 4 decades of marriage. "Where is he?" "In his office. Closing deals on Christmas Eve, as always." Lucy gestured toward the sofa. "Sit down. I need to talk to you before the others get here." "Others?" "Your sister is coming for dinner and some family friends." Ethan felt a pang of apprehension. Caroline, his younger sister, had always been his confidant. If anyone knew about Helen, it was her. And if she was coming for dinner along with family friends... "Mom, is there something I should know?" Lucy hesitated, fiddling with her pearl necklace as she always did when she was nervous. "Ethan, before anything else, I want you to know that we respect your decisions, even the ones we don't completely understand." "What are you talking about?" "About Helen." The name hit Ethan like a punch. He stood up instinctively, walking to the window that overlooked the garden she had redesigned. "What about Helen?" "You ran off without any explanation. To us or to her? You left your life together half-finished, as if those 2.5 years meant nothing." Ethan kept his back to his mother. "I said it was for the best." "For whom, Ethan? For her or for you?" "For her." The answer came out harsher than he intended. Helen deserves someone who isn't afraid to build a family. She deserves someone whole. "And you decided that for her?" The question echoed the words Helen had said on their last night together. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to push the memory away. "Deciding what's best for the people we love is a rather arrogant habit in our family," Lucy continued. "Your father always did it with me. I always did it with you two. And you did it with her." Ethan turned to face his mother. "You don't understand. I can't be what she needs." "And what does she need?" "Emotional security, certainty. Someone who doesn't panic every time the word marriage is mentioned." Lucy stood up and walked toward him. "You know what she really needed, honesty for you, to talk to her about your fears instead of just disappearing." "What for? So she could help me solve problems that are mine?" "So you could solve them together. That's what couples do, Ethan. They face difficulties together." Ethan shook his head. "It wouldn't work. I'm just like Dad. I only know how to love by demanding performance. I would have ended up destroying what we had." "You are not like your father." "How can you be so sure?" Lucy smiled sadly. "Because your father was never aware of his own flaws. He never questioned himself. He never ran from a relationship because he thought the woman deserved better. Robert always thought he was the best any woman could get." His mother's words reverberated in the silence of the room. Ethan had never thought of it that way. "You ran away not because you're like him," Lucy continued, "but because you're afraid of being like him. And that, my son, proves you're already different." Before Ethan could respond, the doorbell rang. Martha appeared at the living room door. "Mrs. Cole, they're here." Ethan looked at his mother, confused. "Who's here?" Lucy took a deep breath. "Caroline. And, well, you'll see." Footsteps approached the living room. Ethan heard his sister's familiar voice talking to Martha in the hallway, but there was another voice too, a voice that made his heart stop. "Helen." Caroline entered first, smiling strangely, almost nervously. At 29, she was a blonde, more extroverted version of Ethan, with a degree in psychology and a knack for creating uncomfortable situations to force conversations her brother avoided. "Hey, big brother, good to have you back." Ethan could barely return his sister's hug. All his senses were focused on the doorway, waiting for the woman who had occupied his thoughts for 17 consecutive months to enter. Helen appeared in the doorway, and for a moment time stood still. She was beautiful, thinner than before, her hair a little shorter, but still with those honey-colored eyes that seemed to see into his soul. She wore a simple dark green velvet dress and low-cut boots. In her hands she held something that made Ethan's world collapse. A baby. No. 3 babies. Helen was pushing a triple stroller, one of those special ones for multiples. Inside, 3 small children slept peacefully, wrapped in red and gold blankets that matched the Christmas decor. Ethan felt his legs go weak. He leaned on the back of the sofa, trying to process what he was seeing. "Hi, Ethan." Helen's voice was calm, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "How are you?" He tried to answer, but no sound came out. The babies were tiny. They must have been around 6 months old. And when the first one opened his little eyes, Ethan felt as if he were looking in a mirror. Dark eyes, a serious expression, the same face shape he saw in his own childhood photos. Are they mine?" The question came, out hoarse, almost inaudible. Helen nodded slowly. "Michael, Beatrice, and Lucy, they were born in July." Ethan did the math quickly. July. If they were born in July, Helen got pregnant in October, the last time they had slept together, a few weeks before the final breakup. Why didn't you tell me?" Helen looked at Lucy, then at Caroline, seeking support. It was clear they knew. They all knew, except him. "Because you made it very clear you didn't want family responsibilities," Helen answered, her voice firm but without hostility. "Because you fled the country the day after we broke up, because I wasn't going to use a pregnancy to blackmail you or force a decision. But they're my children. They're our children, and I've raised them alone until now." The word alone hit Ethan like a slap. He imagined Helen pregnant with triplets, facing morning sickness, doctor's appointments, worries, all without support. He imagined the birth, which must have been complicated and risky. He imagined the first few months, the sleepless nights, 3 babies crying at the same time, all while he was in meetings in Paris, thinking he was protecting Helen from himself. "Helen, no." She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Not now. If you want to be a part of their lives, you're going to have to prove you're really ready, not with words, with actions." Ethan looked at the 3 babies, who were starting to stir in the stroller. One of the girls, Beatrice or Lucy, he didn't know which, opened her eyes and stared at him with curiosity. It was like looking at himself, but without all the emotional baggage he carried. How did you know I was coming back?" Caroline cleared her throat. "I told Helen you were coming for Christmas. We thought it was time for you two to talk." "And what if I didn't want to see them?" Helen adjusted the baby's blankets with careful, practical movements. "Then I would have left, and you would have gone on with your life as if nothing had happened, like you always do." The accusation wasn't spoken with anger, but with a resigned sadness that was much worse than any shout. Ethan realized that, in Helen's eyes, he was the man who abandons, who runs, who chooses the easy way out instead of facing things head-on. And she wasn't wrong. "Michael," the boy started to cry. Helen lifted him from the stroller with automatic movements, clearly accustomed to the routine. She began to rock him gently, whispering sweet words that reminded Ethan of how she cared for the plants in the garden, with infinite patience and genuine love. "He needs a diaper change," Helen murmured, more to herself. "Do you have a place?" "Of course," Lucy said quickly. "The guest room upstairs has everything you need. Martha set up a triple crib and a changing table." Ethan realized this had been planned. His family had known about the babies for months. They had prepared for this moment. probably waiting for an opportunity to bring the two of them together. Helen headed for the stairs, carrying Michael, followed by Martha, who picked up the other two babies. Ethan was left alone in the living room with his mother and sister. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since she found out she was pregnant," Caroline answered. "She called me, desperate, trying to understand why you had disappeared. I told her you always ran when things got serious, but that you'd come back. She said she wasn't going to wait. And you thought it was right to hide this from me." Lucy approached her son. "Ethan, you abandoned this woman and disappeared from the country. She was pregnant with triplets and had to face everything alone because you decided you knew what was best for her. Now you want to complain that we respected her decision not to pressure you?" Ethan ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of his own choices. "I didn't know she was pregnant." "Would it have changed anything?" Caroline asked. "Or would you have run even farther away?" The question was cruel but fair. Ethan couldn't honestly say he would have stayed. At the time, he was so consumed by fear that he probably would have seen the pregnancy as one more reason to protect Helen from himself. Footsteps on the stairs indicated that Helen was coming back. She came down alone, leaving the babies with Martha upstairs. "They'll sleep a little longer," she said, sitting in an armchair far from the sofa where Ethan was. "We can talk." Lucy and Caroline exchanged glances. "We'll leave you two alone," Ethan's mother said. "Dinner is at 8. You have a few hours." When they were alone, the silence stretched like a physical barrier between them. Ethan watched Helen, trying to catalogue all the changes. She seemed more mature, stronger, but also more tired. There was a determination in her posture that hadn't been there before, as if she had been forced to become a more resilient version of herself. "How was it?" he finally asked. "The pregnancy, the birth, the first few months?" Helen studied him for a moment, as if assessing whether he really wanted to know or was just being polite. "Hard," she said simply. "Triplets are considered a high-risk pregnancy. I spent the last 2 months on bed rest. The birth was a C-section at 34 weeks. They spent a month in the NICU." Ethan felt a physical pain in his chest imagining Helen dealing with all of that alone. "Did you have help?" "Your sister was amazing. Lucy, too. My mom came up from Glenwood Springs when they were born." "And financially?" Helen looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "That's none of your business. I managed." The coldness in her response hit him. Helen had always been independent but never cold with him. This version of her was a stranger, someone who had learned to protect herself. "Helen, I don't want excuses, Ethan. I want to know what you plan to do now." "What do you want me to do?" "It's not about what I want. It's about what you want. Do you want to be a part of your children's lives?" Ethan looked up at the ceiling, where he could hear the muffled sounds of the babies. His children. The reality still felt surreal. "I do, but I don't know if I know how." Nobody knows at the beginning. The difference is, I had to learn. You have a choice. "What are they like? As people, I mean?" For the first time since she'd arrived, Helen truly smiled. "Michael is serious, like you. He observes everything before reacting. Beatrice is curious. She wants to touch everything, taste everything. And Lucy is the negotiator. When she cries, the other two stop to see what's going on." Ethan smiled too. "Beautiful names." "Michael is named after my grandfather. Beatrice was the name I always wanted for a daughter. And Lucy," she hesitated. "After my mom?" Helen nodded. "She helped me so much. She deserved the honor." The gesture touched Ethan deeply. Even after being abandoned, Helen had honored his family in her daughter's name. Can I see them again?" Helen stood up. "Come on." They went up together to the guest room, which had been transformed into a full-fledged nursery. 3 cribs side by side, a professional changing table, a nursing chair, shelves stocked with diapers and baby products. It was as if the house had always been prepared to welcome these children. The triplets were awake but quiet, watching the animal mobile spinning above their cribs. When they saw Helen, Michael babbled something that sounded like "Mama." Ethan approached slowly, as if afraid of scaring them. Beatrice looked at him with curiosity, reaching a tiny hand in his direction. "Can I?" "You can." Ethan touched his daughter's tiny hand, feeling her little fingers automatically close around his. It was a natural reflex for babies, he knew, but it moved him nonetheless. "They're perfect," he murmured. "They are. And they're a 24/7 job." Ethan got the message. Helen was making it clear that fatherhood wasn't some romantic part-time gig. "What do I need to do to prove I'm ready?" Helen stared at him for long seconds. "I don't know. You disappeared in the middle of our relationship because you were afraid of commitment. Now you show up and want to be a father to triplets. How am I supposed to know you won't run off again at the first sign of trouble?" It was a fair question, and Ethan had no answer. Because honestly, he didn't know if he was ready for this either. But looking at the 3 babies, feeling Beatrice hold his finger with a strength disproportionate to her size, a certainty grew inside him. He wanted to try. The first cry shattered the pre-dawn silence at 3:47 a.m. Ethan woke, with a start in the guest room where he had insisted on sleeping, near the makeshift nursery. For a split second he forgot where he was and why there was the sound of a baby crying in the Montgomery estate. Then reality came back like an avalanche. He had 3 children. Children he hadn't known existed until 12 hours ago. The crying intensified, and soon 2 others joined in a desperate symphony. Ethan got up quickly, pulling a t-shirt over his pajama bottoms, and went to the nursery. Helen was already there, moving with quiet efficiency between the 3 cribs. "Michael's hungry," she murmured, picking the boy up. "Beatrice probably has a dirty diaper, and Lucy is crying because the others are crying." Ethan watched Helen prepare a bottle with one hand while holding Michael with the other, a move she had clearly perfected over months of practice. She didn't seem fully awake, but her movements were automatic, precise. "Can I help?" Helen hesitated, sizing him up. "You can get Beatrice and take her to the changing table. The diapers are in the bottom drawer." Ethan approached the crib where Beatrice was crying with indignation. She was smaller than he expected, still retaining the delicate size of babies born prematurely. When he picked her up, she stopped crying for a few seconds, surprised by the change. "Hey, princess," he murmured, feeling a strange emotion tighten his chest. "Daddy's here." The word daddy came out naturally but sounded strange to his own ears. He had never imagined himself saying it. Changing a diaper turned out to be a more complex operation than Ethan had imagined. Beatrice squirmed, trying to roll to her side, apparently suspicious of the inexperienced hands handling her. Ethan fumbled with the adhesive tabs, trying to get the diaper. Not too tight, not too loose. "It's crooked," said Helen, who had managed to quiet Michael with the bottle. "And you forgot the diaper cream." Ethan looked at his daughter, who was watching him with an expression far too serious for a 6-month-old. "Sorry, B. Daddy's still learning." Helen came closer, still holding Michael, and with one hand adjusted Beatrice's diaper. "Like this. It needs to be snug, or it'll leak." The physical proximity between them, after more than a year apart, created a palpable tension. Ethan could smell Helen's familiar scent, the soft texture of her skin when her hand accidentally brushed against his. For an instant, it was as if the 17 months of distance had never existed. But when Ethan turned to look at her, Helen had moved away, focusing again on Michael. "Lucy's still crying," Ethan observed. "It's her turn to eat. Can you try to calm her down while I make her bottle?" Ethan picked up his 3rd child, the smallest of the triplets, but apparently the most determined, judging by the power of her cries. He tried to rock her gently as he had seen Helen do, but Lucy only cried louder. "She doesn't know me," he said, frustrated. "You don't know her," Helen corrected. "Try singing something. Music is calming." "Sing? Anything. It doesn't have to be perfect." Ethan felt ridiculous, but he started humming a song he remembered from his childhood. It was a tune Lucy used to sing when he or Caroline was sick. To his surprise, Lucy's crying softened, as if she were evaluating this new voice. "Keep going," Helen encouraged, smiling for the first time since she'd arrived. For the next 40 minutes they worked in silence to soothe the 3 babies. Ethan watched Helen's every move, trying to memorize. The way she held the children, the tone of voice she used, the infinite patience she showed even when clearly exhausted. When the triplets finally went back to sleep, Ethan and Helen sat in the nursing chair and a chair he had pulled over, respectively. The house was quiet again, but neither of them seemed sleepy. "Is it like this every night?" Ethan asked. "Sometimes worse. When one of them is sick or fussy, it can take hours to get them all to sleep." "And you've been doing this alone since they were born?" Helen studied him. "Are you going to feel sorry for me now?" "It's not pity, it's admiration and guilt." "Guilt won't change anything, Ethan. And I don't need admiration. I did what I had to do." Ethan got up and walked to the window overlooking the garden. Even in the dark, he could make out the shapes of the plants Helen had designed years ago. Everything remained exactly as she had planned, as if he had been waiting for her to come back. "How do you manage? Financially, I mean. 3 babies must cost—" "That's none of your business. They're my children too, yes it is. My business." Helen stood up, irritation flashing in her eyes. "Now they're your children? 12 hours ago you didn't even know they existed. For 8 months of my pregnancy, you were closing deals in Paris. For 6 months of their lives, you were opening hotels in London. And now in one day you've become a hands-on dad." The acidity in her voice hit him like a slap. Ethan turned to face her. "You're right. I wasn't here. But I didn't know. And if you had known, would you have stayed or would you have run off to another continent?" The question hung in the air between them. Ethan wanted to say he would have stayed, that he would never abandon his own children. But the words wouldn't come, because he wasn't sure himself. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I probably would have panicked." Helen nodded, as if his answer confirmed what she already knew. "At least you're honest." "Helen, I want to try. I want to be a part of their lives." "Trying isn't enough, Ethan. They need consistency. Someone they can count on. You can't just show up when you're feeling guilty and disappear when the responsibility gets too heavy. And how do I prove I've changed? I don't know. That's for you to figure out." She left the nursery, leaving Ethan alone with the 3 sleeping babies. He approached the cribs, observing the small, serene faces of his children. Michael had a serious expression even in his sleep. Beatrice was smiling slightly, as if dreaming of something good. Lucy slept with her arms outstretched, confident and relaxed. How had these perfect children come from him? How had Helen managed to raise them alone? And how was he going to prove he deserved to be a part of their lives? The next morning, Ethan woke to Martha knocking softly on his bedroom door. "Mr. Ethan, Helen asked me to wake you. The babies are in the dining room." He dressed quickly and went downstairs to find a scene he never expected to see in the Montgomery estate. Helen sitting at the formal dining table, with 3 high chairs arranged beside her, trying to feed Michael, while Beatrice whimpered and Lucy played with a rattle. "Good morning," he greeted. "Morning." Helen didn't look up from the baby food she was trying to spoon into Michael's mouth. "They woke up at 6. They've already had their baths and bottles." "Why didn't you wake me?" "Because it's not your responsibility." Her coldness was starting to annoy him. "Helen, how do you expect me to learn if you don't let me help?" She finally looked at him. "You want to help? Take Beatrice. She's hungry, but she doesn't want to eat." Ethan sat next to his daughter, who watched him with curiosity. He picked up the little pink spoon and tried to imitate the movements he saw Helen making with Michael. "Come on, Bea, it's yummy," he said, offering the food. Beatrice tasted it and made a dramatic face, spitting it all back out. "She doesn't like banana," Helen informed him. "Try the apple." "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been with them for 6 months. I know Michael likes banana and oatmeal, but hates anything with orange. I know Beatrice prefers sweet fruits but will eat vegetables if you mix them with potato. I know Lucy will eat almost anything, but only if it's the exact right temperature. Not too hot, not too cold." Ethan listened to the list attentively, trying to memorize every detail. It was like learning about 3 tiny but complex people, each with their own preferences and personalities already defined. "Should I write this down?" Helen stopped feeding Michael and stared at him. "Write what down?" "The things they like, their routines, the schedules, everything." For the first time, he saw something that might have been surprise on her face. "You would do that?" "Helen, I know I screwed everything up. I know I ran away when you needed me most. But they're here now, and I'm here. If you give me a chance, I want to learn to be the father they deserve." Helen studied him for long seconds. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay, but there are rules." "What are they?" "First, you don't lose your patience. Babies cry, make messes, don't sleep when they're supposed to. If you blow up or walk away when they're being difficult, it's over." "Agreed." "Second, you don't make decisions about them without consulting me. I've been their mother for 6 months. You don't just come in and change routines or rules that already work." "Agreed." "Third, you don't give up. If you start this, you finish it. They can't get used to you and then watch you disappear." Again. Ethan nodded solemnly. "Understood." Helen hesitated before adding the last rule. "And fourth, this is about them, not us. You're here to be a father, not to try and salvage our relationship. That door is closed." The last rule hurt more than Ethan expected, but he understood. Helen was protecting herself, and rightly so. "Understood," he repeated. Over the following days, Ethan immersed himself in the world of fatherhood with the same determination he applied to his business. He woke up early to help with the first bottles, spent the mornings playing with them, and learned to identify the different types of cries for each baby. He discovered that Michael was the calmest but also the most observant. He liked to be held, looking around as if cataloguing everything he saw. Beatrice was pure energy, always trying to grab everything within reach, laughing when she succeeded, crying when frustrated. Lucy was the diplomat. She could calm her siblings just with her presence, but was also the one who got most agitated when she sensed tension in the room. "She picks up on it when we're stressed," Helen explained one afternoon, after Lucy had spent an hour crying for no apparent reason. "How?" "Babies sense tension. If we're nervous, they get nervous too." Ethan watched his youngest daughter, who had stopped crying as soon as Helen relaxed her shoulders and smiled. "It's like she's an emotional barometer." "Exactly. That's why I was so exhausted at the beginning. I was always anxious and she was always fussy. It took me a while to see the connection." It was the kind of knowledge that only came with time and constant observation. Ethan realized that Helen had become an expert on her own children, developing a maternal instinct he didn't even know existed. On the third day, Ethan made his first major mistake. Helen had gone out for a routine checkup for the babies, the first time she'd left the estate alone since arriving. Ethan was in charge of the triplets for 2 hours. Everything went fine for the first hour. The babies played, had their bottles, and took their afternoon nap. But when they woke up, Beatrice started crying uncontrollably. Ethan tried everything: food, a bottle, a diaper change, singing, rocking. Nothing worked. Her crying agitated Michael, who started crying too. And then Lucy joined the chorus, creating a sonic chaos that sent Ethan into a panic. He called Helen's cell, but she didn't answer. She was probably in the appointment. He called Caroline, who wasn't home. He tried Lucy, who had gone to Denver to handle some banking matters. He was alone with 3 desperately crying babies, with no idea what to do. That's when Robert Montgomery, his father, appeared in the nursery. "What's all this noise?" "They won't stop crying," Ethan said, clearly desperate. "I've tried everything Helen taught me, but nothing's working." Robert observed the scene for a few seconds, then, surprisingly, he picked up Michael. "When you and Caroline were little, your mother used to turn on the vacuum cleaner," he said, rocking his grandson with stiff but effective movements. "The white noise is calming. A vacuum cleaner. Or a hairdryer, any constant noise. It mimics the sound of the womb." Robert grabbed the hairdryer from the adjoining bathroom and turned it on low just for the sound. Miraculously, the 3 babies began to calm down. Ethan looked at his father in surprise. "How do you know that? You think you and Caroline never cried. Your mother may have been the primary caregiver, but I learned a few things too." It was rare for Robert to show any practical knowledge of fatherhood. Ethan had mostly seen him interact with his children in formal settings, dinners, family events, discussions about the future and responsibilities. Never in domestic, intimate situations like this. Why did you never, Ethan began. Never what? Never act like this with me and Caroline. Present for the little things. Robert continued rocking Michael, but his face closed off slightly. It was a different time. Men weren't expected to do these things. But did you want to? The question caught Robert by surprise. He looked down at Michael, who had stopped crying completely and was now watching him with curiosity. Want is a complicated word, he said finally. I thought my role was to provide, to protect, to let your mother handle the emotional needs. And do you regret it? Robert didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower than usual. Every day. The answer stunned Ethan. Robert never admitted to regrets or vulnerabilities. You can do it differently, his father continued. With them. You can be the father I didn't know how to be. It was the closest thing to an apology Ethan had ever received from Robert. And it was also permission, or perhaps encouragement, to break family patterns that had lasted for generations. When Helen returned from the doctor's appointment, she found Ethan and Robert sitting side by side in the nursery, each holding a baby, while the third slept peacefully in the crib. The hairdryer was still humming softly in the background. How were the appointments? Ethan asked, getting up to greet her. Fine. They're growing normally. Helen observed the scene with curiosity. Did you have any trouble? They cried a little, but we managed to calm them down, Ethan said, not wanting to worry her. Robert stood up, handing Lucy to Helen. I'll let you two talk, he said, leaving the room. Your father was here? He showed up when they were crying. He helped calm them down. Helen seemed surprised. Robert Montgomery changing diapers? That I'd like to see. He didn't get to diapers, but he knew exactly what to do when they cried. Interesting? Helen sat in the nursing chair, settling Lucy. And you? How did you do on your first time alone? Ethan hesitated. He could lie, say everything went perfectly. But one of the things he was trying to learn was honesty, with Helen and with himself. I panicked, he admitted. When they all started crying together, I didn't know what to do. I tried calling you, but I was in the appointment. I know that now. At the time, I felt completely lost. Helen studied him. And what did you think of that? That I have a lot to learn. And do you plan to? I do. Helen nodded slowly. Okay. Tomorrow you're on your own again. 2 hours. I'm just going to the grocery store. Ethan felt a pang of anxiety, but also determination. Okay. And Ethan? Helen looked at him. Seriously, if you panic again, don't call me. They can tell when we're desperate. Take a deep breath, think about what could be wrong, and solve it. Alone. It was a test, Ethan realized. Helen was checking if he could keep his cool under pressure, if he could take real responsibility for his children. Understood. That night, after the babies were asleep, Ethan and Helen sat on the veranda to talk. It was the first time they had been alone in a social setting since her arrival. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. You can. When you found out you were pregnant, what was your first reaction? Helen was silent for a moment, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the starry sky. Terror, she said finally. Absolute terror. Why? Because I was alone. Because you had made it clear you didn't want family responsibilities. Because a triplet pregnancy is expensive and complicated, and I had neither the emotional nor the financial support I needed. And after that? After that, I decided I would figure it out, that it didn't matter if you didn't want to be a father. I wanted to be a mother. And that I would do the best I could with the resources I had. Ethan felt guilty again, but also admired her strength. Helen, I know I can't change what happened, but I want you to know that if I had known— Stop, she interrupted him. Don't torture yourself with what-ifs. What matters is what you do from now on. What do you need from me, materially, I mean? Helen looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Nothing. What do you mean, nothing? 3 babies cost— Ethan, I work, I have projects, I make my own money. But it must be hard. So how to balance work with... It is, but it's my reality. I've gotten used to it. Ethan realized that Helen had developed a fierce independence in the months she was alone. It was as if she had learned not to count on anyone, to solve everything on her own. What if I wanted to help financially? Why? Because they're my children too. Because it's my responsibility. Helen studied him carefully. Do you want to help because you feel guilty, or because you really want to take on fatherhood? Both. The honesty of his answer seemed to surprise her. Child support can be discussed, she said finally. But I don't want to depend on you. If you decide tomorrow that this is too much and run off again, they and I need to be okay on our own. I'm not going to run off. You don't know that, and neither do I. She was right, Ethan knew. Words were easy. Consistent actions over time. That was the real test. What can I do to earn your trust? Helen stood up, preparing to go inside. Show up every day, for 6 months. Then we'll talk. 6 months. 180 days to prove that he had changed, that he was ready to be the father his children deserved. Ethan looked out at the mountains, breathing in the cold night air. For years he had run from emotional responsibilities, believing he was protecting himself. Now, for the first time, he wanted to stay and fight for something that truly mattered. He just hoped it wasn't too late to learn how to be the man he should have been from the start. 3 weeks after Christmas, Ethan had settled into a routine he never imagined possible. He woke up at 6 a.m. to help with the first bottles, spent the morning playing with the triplets while Helen worked on her landscape architecture projects, and dedicated the afternoons to learning every aspect of raising his children. He had discovered that Michael preferred to be held on the left shoulder, that Beatrice slept better with a specific lullaby, and that Lucy had colic that only subsided with clockwise circular massages on her tummy. They were small, intimate pieces of knowledge that made all the difference in their day-to-day lives. The Montgomery estate had been transformed. What was once a formal, silent environment now echoed with baby cries, laughter, children's music, and whispered conversations during nap times. Lucy was radiant, doting on her grandchildren. She had bought enough clothes to dress 6 babies. Robert, surprisingly, had proven to be a more present grandfather than he had ever been a father, showing up in the nursery every afternoon to check if everything was okay, but clearly just wanting to hold his grandchildren. Caroline visited almost every day, bringing educational toys and books on child development that Ethan devoured as if they were business manuals. "You're obsessed," Helen commented one afternoon, finding Ethan taking detailed notes on each baby's sleep schedule. "I'm being methodical," he corrected. "I want to understand the patterns. They're babies, not Excel spreadsheets." Ethan laughed but kept writing. It was his way of dealing with the feeling of always being one step behind. If he couldn't get back the 6 months he'd lost, at least he could become an expert from that moment on. Helen watched him with an expression he couldn't decipher. There was less coldness between them than at the beginning, but she still maintained a careful distance. She was polite, collaborative, but never intimate. Ethan respected the boundaries she had set, even though they hurt, more than he expected. What he didn't expect was how much he would fall in love with his own children. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something that grew gradually, built from small moments. Michael gripping his finger with disproportionate strength. Beatrice laughing when he made silly faces. Lucy stopping her crying at the sound of his voice. They were simple gestures that provoked overwhelming emotions. One January morning, while Helen was in the shower and the babies were playing on the living room rug, Ethan received a call that would change everything. "Ethan?" The voice was Marcus Volker, his German partner in several European ventures. "I have a proposal that can't wait." "Go ahead, Marcus." "The Saudi Arabian investors have approved our sustainable resort project. They want to fast-track construction. We need to sign the contracts by the end of the week." Ethan felt his heart race. This was the project he had worked on for the entire previous year, a chain of eco-friendly resorts that would be his biggest international venture. "That's great news. Send the documents over by email and—" "Ethan," Marcus interrupted, "they want an in-person meeting. The entire board needs to be present to sign." "The contracts. In Dubai. On Thursday." Thursday? What day is it today? Monday. I know it's short notice, but they were clear. Either we close this week or they find other partners. Ethan looked at the triplets scattered on the rug. Michael was trying to reach a colourful rattle. Beatrice was chewing on a teething ring with intense concentration. Lucy was watching him with those dark eyes identical to his own. Ethan, are you there? I'm here. Marcus, I need to think. I'll call you back in an hour. He hung up the phone and sat on the floor next to the babies. The Dubai project represented years of work and millions of dollars. It was the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. It also meant leaving Helen and the children just as he was starting to build a solid relationship with them. Who was that? Helen came down the stairs, her hair still damp from the shower. Marcus, my German partner. A problem? Ethan hesitated. Actually, an opportunity, but a complicated one. He explained about the project, the meeting in Dubai, the tight deadline. Helen listened in silence, her expression growing more and more closed off. When do you need to travel? She asked when he finished. Thursday. I'd be back on Sunday. 4 days. Yeah? Helen picked up Lucy, avoiding looking directly at Ethan. Then you should go. Helen. Ethan, you don't owe me an explanation. We're parents to the same children, but that doesn't mean you have to give up your career. There was something in her voice, a resignation that sounded almost like relief, that alarmed Ethan. You think I should go? I think you should do what's best for you. What if I don't go? Helen finally looked at him. Why wouldn't you? It's an important project, isn't it? It is. Then go. Ethan stood up and walked over to her. Helen, look at me. Do you want me to go? She didn't answer immediately, but he saw something break in her expression. I want you to stop pretending you've changed and be honest about what you really want, she said finally. I want you to stop playing dedicated dad and admit that your real life is out there, closing deals and building hotels. That's not true. Isn't it? Then why are you even considering the trip? The question hit him like a punch. Why was he considering it? Money wasn't an issue. He had more than he could spend in a lifetime. Professional prestige wasn't an urgent need either. So why? It's a unique opportunity. And they are unique children. What's the priority? Ethan looked at Michael, Beatrice, and Lucy, who continued playing, oblivious to the tension between their parents. 3 little people who depended on him, who were learning to trust him. And he was actually considering abandoning them for a business meeting. You're right, he said, picking up his phone to call Marcus back. What are you doing? Calling to turn it down. Helen grabbed his arm, stopping him. Don't do that. Why not? Because if you turn it down for my sake, you'll regret it. And if you regret it for my sake, you'll blame me. And if you blame me, you'll find an excuse to slip away in a few months when the novelty of fatherhood wears off. Ethan stared at her, shocked by her cold analysis of him. Is that what you really think of me? It's what I know about you, Ethan. You always choose what's emotionally safest, and your career has always been safer than family. Her words hurt, because they contained a kernel of truth he didn't want to admit. For years, he really had used work as a refuge when relationships got too complicated, but looking at his children, at Helen holding Lucy with that mix of love and exhaustion on her face, Ethan felt something he had never experienced before, the absolute certainty that his family was more important than anything. You're wrong, he said, dialing Marcus. Ethan, don't do this for... Marcus? Ethan spoke into the phone, cutting Helen off. It's me again. I won't be able to travel to Dubai. What? Do you mean you can't? Ethan, this is a 15 million euro contract. I know, but I have family commitments I can't cancel. Family commitments? Since when do you... Since always, Marcus. If they won't accept a video conference, find other investors. Ethan, are you crazy? This is the chance of a lifetime. No, Marcus. The chance of my lifetime is right here at home. Find other investors. Goodbye. He hung up and looked at Helen, who was watching him with a shocked expression. Why did you do that? Because they are more important than any contract. But it was 15 million euros. Helen, I have more money than I'll ever be able to spend. What I don't have is lost time with my children, and you can't buy that. She studied him for long seconds, as if trying to understand if he was being sincere or just dramatic. "You're going to regret this," she said finally. "I might regret a lot of things in my life, but choosing to stay with you all won't be one of them." That afternoon, Ethan felt strange. It was as if he had crossed an invisible line, the line between being a man who had children and truly being a father. The difference was subtle but significant. That night, after the children were asleep, he found Helen on the veranda, looking out at the garden. "Can I sit?" She nodded, and they sat in silence for a few minutes. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Better than okay. I'm relieved." Relieved? For years, I thought professional success was the only thing that defined me. Today, I found out I was wrong. Helen looked at him. "And what defines you?" Ethan thought for a moment. "The people I choose to love, and the choices I make to protect that love." "That's very nice, Ethan, but it's only been 3 weeks and one decision. Fatherhood is 18 years and thousands of decisions." "I know." "Do you really? Because the day will come when Beatrice has a 104-degree fever on the same day you have the most important meeting of your life. The day will come when Michael needs to go to the hospital in the middle of the night. The day will come when Lucy cries for 4 straight hours for no apparent reason, and you'll be exhausted and want to disappear." Ethan listened to every word, trying to imagine those situations. "So, what are you going to do?" Helen continued. "Are you going to call the nanny, ask me to handle it, or are you going to cancel the meeting, spend the night at the hospital, and hold your daughter for 4 hours if you have to?" "I'm going to stay with them," Ethan said without hesitation. "Always. Always is a very strong word. And I'm serious." Helen studied him once more, as if trying to see beyond the words. "Ethan, when you ran away last year, why did you really leave?" The question caught him by surprise. They had talked about a lot of things in the past few weeks, but never directly about the reasons for their breakup. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of what?" "Of not being enough. Of you finding out I didn't know how to love right. Of hurting you by trying. And now? Now I know I can still hurt you even when I'm trying to do everything right. But I also know that running away hurts more than trying and failing." Helen was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "How long has it been since you've been to the office?" Ethan had to think. "About 2 weeks. Why? Don't you miss it? The adrenaline of business, the important decisions, feeling indispensable?" It was a shrewd question. Ethan realized Helen was testing whether he missed the life he had left behind. "You know what I miss most?" he said. "What?" "You. I miss talking to you like we used to. I miss making you laugh. I miss sharing the good things that happened during the day." Helen looked away. "Ethan, I know. You said that door was closed. I'm respecting that. But I can't pretend I don't miss it. It's complicated. I know. You hurt me a lot. I know. And it's not just about me. It's about them, too. They can't get used to the idea of their parents being together and then see it all fall apart again." Ethan looked toward the nursery window, where a soft light stayed on all night. "Helen, can I promise you something?" "What?" "Regardless of what happens between us, I will never leave their lives again. Even if you marry another man, even if I'm just the weekend dad, I will be present, always." "How can you be so sure?" Ethan turned to look her directly in the eyes. "Because today, for the first time in my life, I chose to stay when I could have left. And it wasn't hard. It was the easiest thing I've ever done." The next day, an unexpected test would put his words to the proof. Ethan woke to the sound of intense crying from the nursery. It wasn't the normal morning cry. It was something desperate, frightened. He jumped out of bed and ran upstairs, where he found Helen trying to calm Beatrice. "She has a high fever," Helen said, clearly worried. 104. I need to take her to the hospital." "Now?" "Now. A high fever in a baby is an emergency." Ethan looked at Michael and Lucy, who had woken up from their sister's crying and were starting to get fussy too. "I'm going with you," he said. "And them?" Helen gestured to the other two babies. Ethan hesitated for only a second. He could wake Martha to stay with Michael and Lucy. He could call Lucy. He could find a solution that would let him go to the hospital with Helen and Beatrice. But he looked at his children, Michael with his eyes wide with fear, Lucy starting to cry with anxiety, and realized they needed him there. "You go with Beatrice," he said. "I'll stay with them." "Ethan, are you sure?" "I'm sure. Take her now. I'll handle things here." Helen hesitated. "What if they get difficult? What if you can't calm them down?" "I can. Go." She looked him in the eyes, assessing if she could trust him with the other two children in an emergency. "Okay," she said finally. "If anything happens, call me." "Everything will be fine. Take care of our princess." Helen wrapped Beatrice in a blanket and rushed out. Ethan was left alone with Michael and Lucy, both clearly upset by the sudden absence of their mother and sister. They were the 6 longest hours of Ethan's life. Michael cried for a full hour, refusing his bottle and rejecting all attempts at comfort. Lucy became inconsolable whenever Ethan left her line of sight, even for a few seconds. They both sensed the tension in the house and reacted by being more difficult than they had ever been. But Ethan didn't panic. He didn't call anyone for help. He sang. He walked around the house with them in his arms. He told silly stories, made faces, offered food, changed diapers, and gave them a warm bath to calm them down. When Helen finally returned from the hospital, Beatrice had just a common viral infection treated with a fever reducer. She found Ethan asleep in the nursery armchair with Michael and Lucy asleep in his arms. She watched them for a few minutes, seeing how her children were completely relaxed and safe in their father's arms. It was the first time Ethan had been alone with them in a truly difficult situation. And he had handled it. "Ethan," she whispered. He woke with a start. "How's Bea?" "Fine. It was just a virus." "How are they?" Ethan looked at the children in his arms. "They missed you, but we were okay together." Helen sat in the chair next to the armchair. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For staying, for not panicking, for letting me take care of Beatrice without worrying about them." Ethan looked at her. "Helen, you don't have to thank me for taking care of my own children. Yes, I do, because you could have run when things got tough. You could have called Martha or your mum. You could have found an excuse not to take responsibility. But I didn't. No, you didn't, and that means something." Ethan realized he had passed the test, not just the test of staying with the children in an emergency, but the more important test. He had proven that when he had to choose between convenience and responsibility, he chose responsibility. "Helen," he said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "You can." "Do you still love me?" The question came out more directly than he intended. Helen didn't answer immediately, but she didn't look away either. "That's not a fair question," she said finally. "Why not?" "Because love was never our problem, Ethan. The problem was always trust. And now? Do you trust me?" Helen looked at the children sleeping in his arms, then at him. "I'm starting to." March arrived, bringing the fall and a routine that Ethan never imagined he would love so much. It had been 3 months since Christmas, 3 months since he discovered he was a father, and every day brought small revelations about himself that surprised him. He had discovered that he could invent funny voices for reading children's stories, that he had infinite patience for assembling 4-piece puzzles over and over, that he could identify which of the triplets was crying just by the sound, even from a distance, and that he was capable of feeling an absurd happiness watching Michael try to grab his own feet, Beatrice babble meaningless syllables, or Lucy smile when she saw him enter the room. The Montgomery estate had officially become the baby's house. Toys were scattered across the marble halls, strollers in the garage where only imported cars once stood, and children's music echoed through corridors that had once known only opera and classical music. It was a transformation that should have seemed chaotic, but Ethan found it perfect. Helen had moved into the estate permanently, not into his room, but into a suite on the same floor as the nursery. It was a practical arrangement that allowed them to share parental responsibilities efficiently, but maintained the emotional distance she still deemed necessary. Even so, Ethan felt that something was changing between them. It was little things. Helen genuinely laughing at the silly faces he made to entertain the children. Conversations that stretched on after the babies were asleep. The way she no longer pulled her hand away when he accidentally touched it while they were caring for the triplets. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. There was still caution, still distance, but there was also a growing intimacy built on a solid foundation of renewed trust. One Tuesday morning, Ethan received a call that would once again test his commitment to the new life he had chosen. Ethan Montgomery Cole. The female voice was professional, unfamiliar. Speaking. This is Patricia Miller from Forbes magazine. We're preparing a feature on young entrepreneurs who have revolutionized the real estate market, and we'd like to include you in our 30 under 35 list. Ethan sat down at the kitchen table where he was having coffee while watching Helen give Lucy a bottle. It's an honor, but the feature will be a special cover story for the April issue. It would include an exclusive interview, a photo shoot at your main office, and a spotlight on your most recent international projects. It would be a unique opportunity to solidify your position as one of the leading names in the industry. Ethan looked at Helen, who had realized the nature of the conversation and was watching him with curiosity. When would the interview be? Next Thursday. It would be at our studio in New York, from 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. The photo shoot would be on Friday at your office. 2 full days in New York. Can I think about it and call you back? Of course, but I need an answer by tomorrow. The issue goes to print next week. Ethan hung up and found Helen staring at him. Business magazine, she asked. Forbes. They want to include me in a list of influential young entrepreneurs. And? It would be the cover story, 2 long interviews, photo shoot. Helen nodded slowly. When? Next Thursday and Friday. New York? Yeah. Helen turned her attention back to Lucy, who had finished her bottle and was now playing with Helen's fingers. It's an important opportunity, she said, without looking at Ethan. It is. Then you should go. Ethan stood up and walked over to her. Helen, look at me. She looked up, and Ethan saw a tired resignation that alarmed him. You want me to go? Ethan, it's not about what I want. It's about what's best for your career. What if I don't want to go? You want to go. I see it on your face when you get business calls. You miss that world. Ethan pulled up a chair and sat next to her. Helen, it's true that I miss it sometimes. I miss the adrenaline, the intellectual challenge, the feeling of building something. But you know what I've discovered? What? That I'm building something here too, and it's much more important than any magazine or professional recognition. Helen studied him for a few seconds. What if it were possible to do both? To be a present father and maintain your career? The question caught him by surprise. What do you mean? Ethan, you don't have to choose between being a father and being a businessman. You can be both. But you all need me here. We do need you, yes. But not 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. An occasional trip to New York isn't going to make you an absent father. Ethan realized that Helen was trying to give him permission to keep a foot in the business world, but he also realized it was a test. She wanted to see if he could balance both parts of his life without sacrificing his family. What if I accept the interview, but I bring you all with me? Helen seemed surprised. How? A family-friendly hotel in New York, a suite with a nursery. You and the kids can enjoy the city while I work during the day. We'll have dinner together every night. Ethan, the logistics of traveling with 3 babies is complicated, I know, but not impossible. We have the financial means to make it work, and it would be our first family trip. Helen hesitated, clearly weighing the proposal. Why do you want us to go with you? Because I don't want to do anything important in my life anymore without you all nearby. And because I want you to know that even when I'm working, you are my priority. What if the babies interfere with your work? What if they get sick? What if it's more complicated than you imagine? Then we'll figure it out together as a family. The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings that neither of them was ready to fully explore. "Okay," Helen said finally, "let's try." The following week was a whirlwind of preparations. Ethan arranged for a presidential suite at the St. Regis with special family services, hired a temporary nanny to help during the interviews, and coordinated detailed logistics to transport 3 babies, equipment, clothes, and everything else they might need. Helen, for her part, demonstrated an organizational efficiency that impressed Ethan. She made detailed lists of medications, scheduled pediatric appointments before the trip, researched family-friendly places in New York, and prepared an emergency kit that covered every possible eventuality. "You should be an event planner," Ethan commented, watching Helen pack suitcases with military precision. "3 babies teach you to plan for any catastrophe," she replied, smiling. On Thursday morning, the Montgomery family's private jet took off for New York, carrying a very different delegation than usual: 2 adults, 3 babies, a nanny, 4 suitcases of clothes, 2 suitcases of baby gear, a suitcase of toys, and a medical kit that could equip a NICU. During the flight, Ethan watched Helen interact with the children. It was impossible not to admire the naturalness with which she had embraced motherhood. Not just the practical aspects, changing diapers, preparing bottles, soothing cries, but the emotional intuition she seemed to have with each of the children. Michael was fussy because of the change in environment, and Helen instinctively began to sing a specific song that always calmed him. Beatrice was curious about the plane window, and Helen held her in the exact position so she could see the clouds without getting dizzy. Lucy was nervous about the engine noise, and Helen rocked her with rhythmic movements that made her fall asleep in minutes. "How do you know exactly what each one needs?" Ethan asked. "Maternal instinct, I guess, or maybe it's because I spend 24 hours a day with them. You'll develop it too." "I've already started. Sometimes I know one of them is going to cry before the crying even starts." Helen smiled. "It's the parent-child connection. It's real." The hotel in New York was luxurious, but also practical. The suite had 3 professional cribs, a baby bathtub, a bottle warmer, and even a pediatrician on call 24 hours a day. Ethan had thought of every detail to make the stay comfortable for everyone. The first interview was on Thursday morning at the Forbes headquarters. Ethan left Helen and the children at the hotel spa, which had prepared a special environment for mothers with babies, and left with a mix of anxiety and excitement. It had been months since he had been in a purely professional environment, and it was strange to switch back to businessman mode. The Italian suit, the leather shoes, the document case. It all felt like a costume he had temporarily abandoned. The interview went well. Ethan talked about his international projects, innovations in sustainable architecture, and expansion plans for the next 5 years. But when the journalist asked about his personal life, something in his tone changed. "Are you single, Ethan?" "Actually, I have a family. Their girlfriend and 3 children. 3 children, wow, how do you balance family life with such an intense career? I've learned that family isn't an obstacle to professional success. It's the motivation for it. I work better now because I know who I'm working for." "And how does your girlfriend handle your constant travel?" Ethan smiled. "She came with me to New York, with the babies. We're learning to make it work." The journalist seemed intrigued. "Is it a recent relationship?" "Not exactly. It's complicated, but we're building something solid." When he returned to the hotel in the late afternoon, Ethan found a scene that filled him with joy. Helen in the spa's heated pool, with the 3 babies in special floaties, all laughing and splashing in the warm water. "How was the interview?" she asked when she saw him. "Good. I talked about you all." "What did you say?" "That I have a family, that I'm a father, that you all are the reason I work." Helen seemed surprised. "You said that in an official interview?" "I did. Why? Should I have hidden it?" "No, it's just, you've never spoken publicly about your personal life. You've always kept those things private." "Because before I didn't have a personal life worth mentioning. Now I do." That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan and Helen had dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was the first time they had gone out alone together since before the babies were born. "This is weird," Helen commented, cutting her salmon. What is? Us. Here. Alone. Like normal adults. Ethan laughed. We are normal adults. No, we're parents of triplets. That kind of cancels out normal. They talked about the interview, about New York, about their plans for the next day. It was a light, natural conversation, without the careful tension that had marked the past few weeks. Can I ask you something? Helen said over dessert. Of course. Do you miss it? The life before? When you could travel whenever you wanted, work late, have no responsibilities to anyone but yourself? Ethan considered the question carefully. Sometimes I miss the simplicity, not having to worry if someone has a fever or if they've eaten enough. But you know what I miss most? What? Not having met this version of myself sooner. I like who I am when I'm with you all. I'm more patient, more present, more real. More real. For years I pretended to be who I thought I should be, the successful businessman, the son who meets expectations, the man who doesn't need anyone. With you all, I can just be me. Helen studied him. And who are you, Ethan? Really? A man who would rather stay home reading stories to his children than closing international deals. A man who thinks the most beautiful sound in the world is the four of you laughing together in the living room. A man who discovered that love isn't performance, it's presence. The words came, out deeper than he intended, loaded with meanings they both recognized. Ethan. I know, he hurried to say. I know you still need time. I know you don't trust me completely yet. I just wanted you to know that I've changed. For real. Helen didn't answer immediately, but she didn't look away either. I see that you've changed, she said finally, but change doesn't erase the past. I need to be sure that when things get hard, because they will, you won't run again. What can I do to give you that certainty? Time, consistency, proof that when you say always, you really mean always. The next morning, the test came sooner than either of them expected. Ethan was getting ready for the photo shoot when he received a frantic call from Helen. Ethan, you need to come back now. What happened? Michael is having a febrile seizure. I'm on my way to the hospital. Ethan felt the world spin. What do you mean, a seizure? A very high fever. He seized for 2 minutes. It stopped, but I need to get him to the ER, now. I'm on my way. No, go to the photo shoot. I'll handle it. Helen, our son is having a seizure and you want me to go to a photo shoot. It's just a high fever. Febrile seizures are common in babies, but I need to be sure. I'm going to the hospital. To hell with the magazine. Ethan hung up and immediately called the photo shoot producer. Patricia, it's Ethan Montgomery Cole. I need to cancel the shoot. Cancel? Ethan, the magazine goes to print on Monday. Family emergency. We'll have to reschedule. But that will delay the entire production. Ethan was already leaving the hotel, running for the elevator. Patricia, my son is in the hospital. The magazine is important, but he is more important. Reschedule or pull my feature from the issue. Goodbye. He arrived at Rose Medical Center in Denver 20 minutes later, still wearing the suit from the cancelled photo shoot. He found Helen in the pediatric emergency room, holding Michael while a doctor examined him. Beatrice and Lucy were in the double stroller, with the nanny trying to keep them calm. How is he? Ethan asked, approaching. The seizure stopped. The fever is down with the reducer. But they want to run some tests to make sure it's nothing serious, Helen explained. Ethan looked at Michael, who seemed smaller and more fragile in the hospital setting. He felt a mix of fear and guilt. What if something serious was happening? What if he had wasted crucial time at a photo shoot? Doctor, how long will this take? A few hours. We want to monitor him and wait for the test results. But it's likely just a common febrile reaction. Ethan sat next to Helen, taking her free hand. You cancelled the shoot? She asked. Obviously. Will it hurt your feature in the magazine? Helen, honestly, I couldn't care less about the magazine right now. Our family is here. Helen looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. There was surprise, relief, and something that might have been gratitude. You didn't even hesitate, she murmured. What do you mean? When I called, You didn't think twice before cancelling your work. Ethan realized he had passed another test. This time he hadn't even thought of it as a test. He had simply acted on paternal instinct. "Michael is my son," he said simply. "Nothing is more important than him, than you all." They spent the rest of the day at the hospital. The tests confirmed it had been just a benign febrile seizure, common in babies. But the scare served to show them both how unpredictable and frightening parenthood could be. On the flight back to Aspen, with Michael recovered and the other two sleeping peacefully, Helen broke the silence. "Ethan, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I called you from the hospital, a part of me expected you to hesitate, for you to say you were going to finish the photo shoot first." "Why would you expect that?" "Because that's what the old Ethan would have done. He would have found a justification to finish his work before dealing with the family emergency." Ethan sat next to her on the plane. "And what did you think when I didn't hesitate?" Helen smiled, the first genuine, unreserved smile he had seen in months. "I thought that maybe you really have changed." "I have, and I keep changing. Every day I spend with you all, I become a better man." "Ethan?" "Yes? Thank you for cancelling everything and coming running, for not hesitating for a second." "Helen, you don't have to thank me for—" "Yes, I do, because it made me feel like I'm not alone in this, that you're truly a partner, not just a helper." The difference between a partner and a helper was subtle, but significant. Ethan realized that Helen was starting to see him as a real father, not just someone who helped her take care of the children. "I will always be here," he said, "for emergencies and for all the little things too." "I know," Helen replied. And for the first time, Ethan believed that she really did. When they got home, the triplets were greeted by Lucy and Robert like heroes returning from battle. The morning at the hospital had scared the whole family, but it had also served to show how everyone, including Ethan, had fully embraced their roles as parents and grandparents. That night, after the children were asleep, Helen appeared at the door of Ethan's room. "Can I come in?" "Of course." She sat in the armchair near the window, and Ethan sensed that something important was about to be said. "Today at the hospital," she began, "when you came running in, still in your suit, having clearly dropped everything to come, it was the first time I truly believed you're not going to leave." Ethan felt his heart race. "Helen, let me finish. For months I've been waiting for you to get tired, to get bored, to find an excuse to go back to your old life. But today I realize that this is your life now. We are." "You always were," Ethan said softly. "It just took me a while to understand." Helen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where their children played in the afternoons. "I still love you," she said without turning around. "I never stopped loving you, I just stopped trusting you." The words hit Ethan like a lightning bolt. "And now? Now I'm starting to trust you again." She turned to look at him, and Ethan saw tears in her eyes. "But love and trust aren't enough, Ethan. I need certainty. Certainty that when I say I love you again, you won't panic and run." Ethan stood up and walked toward her, stopping close enough to touch her, but respecting the space she still needed. "Helen, can I give you one certainty?" "What?" "Whatever happens between us, I will never run from what I feel again. I will never choose emotional safety over real love. And I will never ever abandon you or them again." Helen studied him for long seconds, as if trying to see the sincerity behind his words. "How can you be so sure?" "Because today, when you called from the hospital, I didn't even think. Instinctively, automatically, I cancelled everything and ran to you. It wasn't a rational decision, it's who I am now." Helen nodded slowly. "I need a little more time," she said. "How much time?" "I don't know. Some more time to be sure that this change is permanent." Ethan smiled. "I have the rest of my life, Helen. I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise he knew he could keep, because for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be anywhere else. 6 months later, on a golden September morning, Ethan woke to the familiar sound of the triplets stirring in the room next door. It had been 8 months since that Christmas night that had changed his life forever, and every day brought new discoveries about fatherhood, about himself, and about the love he had almost lost to fear. Michael, Beatrice, and Lucy were now 15 months old, and their personalities had defined themselves in surprising ways. Michael was contemplative and affectionate, preferring to be held while observing the world around him. Beatrice was pure energy, always trying to climb furniture and explore every corner of the estate. Lucy was the family diplomat, managing to mediate fights between her siblings with strategic smiles and perfectly timed hugs. Ethan had become an expert on each of them. He knew that Michael liked to be woken up with tickles on his feet, that Beatrice needed 15 minutes of playtime before accepting any meal, and that Lucy would only fall asleep if someone sang softly to her. The Montgomery estate had been completely transformed. The formal living rooms now had colorful rugs and scattered toys. The pool had gained a safe, shallow area for the children. Robert's office, once sacred territory, now received daily visits from his grandchildren, who had won over their grandfather completely. Lucy was radiant in her new role as a hands-on grandmother. She had retired from her social activities to dedicate herself fully to the triplets, and Ethan had never seen her so happy. Caroline visited at least 3 times a week, always bringing new toys and theories on child development. She had read online. But what had changed the most was the relationship between Ethan and Helen. During the 6 months following the trip to New York, they had built something new on the rubble of what had been destroyed. It was no longer the impulsive passion of before. It was something more mature, more solid, more conscious. They lived in the same house, raised children together, and shared responsibilities and important decisions, but they still slept in separate rooms. Ethan respected Helen's pace, but he couldn't deny that he missed the physical and emotional intimacy they had once shared. There were nights when the urge to cross the hall and knock on her door was almost irresistible. But he had promised himself he wouldn't push, that he would let Helen determine when and if she was ready to take the next step. On that September morning, Ethan got dressed and went to the nursery to find a scene that made him smile. Helen sitting on the floor with the 3 toddlers around her, all still in their pajamas, playing with colorful blocks. She wore a simple cotton nightgown, her hair in a messy bun. To Ethan, she had never looked more beautiful. "Good morning, family," he said, sitting on the floor next to Michael. "Morning," Helen replied, smiling in a way that still made his heart race. "They woke up early today. I think they sensed it's a special day." Ethan furrowed his brow. "Special day?" Helen laughed. "You forgot? It's Michael's first birthday today." Ethan felt his stomach drop. How could he have forgotten his own son's birthday? "Just kidding," Helen said quickly, seeing the panic on his face. "Their birthday is in July. I was just testing you." "Helen!" Ethan tossed a block at her, making her laugh harder. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." "Sorry, but it was funny to see you panic at the thought of forgetting something important about them." It was true. Ethan had become almost obsessive about his children's milestones. He kept a detailed journal of all their firsts. First smile, first time rolling over, first time babbling something that sounded like dada. He wouldn't miss a single important moment if he could help it. "Actually," Helen continued, "today is a special day for another reason." "What's that?" Helen hesitated, fiddling with one of the blocks. "It's been exactly 1 year since I found out I was pregnant." The weight of the date hit Ethan. A year ago, Helen was alone, discovering she was carrying triplets, not knowing if the father of her children would ever come back to take responsibility. "Helen, it's not to make you feel guilty," she said quickly. "It's to mark how far we've come. A year ago, I was terrified and alone. Today, I'm raising 3 healthy toddlers with a partner who has become the father I always dreamed of for them." The compliment hit Ethan unexpectedly. For months he had worked to prove he deserved Helen's trust, but he was never sure if he was succeeding. "Do you really think so? Ethan, you wake up every night when one of them cries. You cancel meetings if they're sick. You read stories with different voices that make them die laughing. You know exactly how each of them likes to be comforted when they're sad." Helen looked at him directly. "You're not just a good father. You are their father." The difference between the two was subtle but significant. Ethan realized that Helen no longer saw him as someone trying to be a father. She recognized him as a father. Period. "And what about me?" he asked, moving a little closer. "What kind of partner have I become?" Helen paused her play with the blocks, considering the question carefully. "The kind of partner I can trust," she said finally. "The kind who shows up when he says he will. The kind who puts his family first without being asked. And the kind who is patiently waiting for me to work up the courage to take the next step." Ethan felt his heart race. "Helen, I know you're waiting, Ethan. I know it's been hard for you to give me the space I need, and I know you've shown a patience that the old Ethan didn't have. I just want you to feel safe." "I do feel safe. That's the problem." Ethan was confused. How can safety be a problem? Helen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where they had once taken their first walk together. "For months, I've protected myself by keeping an emotional distance. I convinced myself it was to protect the children, but it was really to protect myself. Because having you back in my life, it's scary." "Scary? How?" "Scary because I could fall in love with you all over again, completely. And if I do that and you run—" Ethan stood up too, leaving the triplets playing on the rug, and approached Helen. "Helen, look at me." She turned, and Ethan saw real vulnerability in her eyes for the first time in months. "I understand your fear," he said, "because I have the same fear." "What do you mean?" "I'm afraid that one day you'll realize you can do it all on your own. Raise the kids, run your career, be happy, and you won't need me. I'm afraid you'll forgive me but never truly love me again." Helen studied him for long seconds. "Ethan, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course. I never stopped loving you. Not when you left, not when I found out I was pregnant and alone, not during the worst moments of the first few months with the babies. I was hurt, disappointed, furious. But I never stopped loving you." The words struck Ethan like a physical blow. "Then why?" "Because love wasn't enough last time. You loved me before you left, I know that, and you still left. So this time I needed more than love. I needed certainty. And now, are you certain?" Helen walked back to where the babies were playing. Michael had managed to stack 3 blocks and was clapping, proud of his achievement. Beatrice was trying to fit a round block into a square hole, determined to make it work. Lucy was watching her siblings with a little smile, as if she knew something they didn't. "Look at them," Helen said. "Look how happy they are, how secure. They have their mother and father present, involved, in love with them. This is exactly what I dreamed of for them when I found out I was pregnant. Helen, and look at you. You're no longer the man who ran when things got serious. You're someone who stays, who faces things, who chooses love even when it's hard. You've proven that every single day for 8 months. Ethan felt tears welling up. "What are you saying?" Helen moved closer to him, standing near enough that he could smell her familiar perfume. "I'm saying I'm certain. Certain that you've changed. Certain that you won't run. Certain that we can build something solid and lasting." "And?" Helen smiled, the full, unreserved smile that Ethan hadn't seen in over a year. "And I'm saying I want to try again. I want us to be a real family. I want to sleep in your bed, wake up in your arms, and plan the rest of our lives together." Ethan felt as if the entire world had just realigned around him. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." He kissed her right there, in the middle of the nursery, with their 3 children playing at their feet. It was a kiss that carried 8 months of longing, of rebuilding, of a love that had survived separation and grown stronger. For it, when they parted, Michael was looking at them with curiosity. Beatrice had stopped trying to fit the block and was smiling as if she understood something important had happened, and Lucy was clapping as if in applause. "I think they approve," Helen said, laughing. "They're smart," Ethan replied. "They know a good decision when they see one." That afternoon, while the triplets were napping, Ethan and Helen sat in the garden to talk about the future. "How are we going to make this work?" Ethan asked. "What do you mean?" "Family, work, our relationship. How do we balance it all?" Helen settled onto the bench beside him. "The same way we have for the past few months, together, as partners." "I want to marry you," Ethan said suddenly. Helen laughed. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a statement of intent. The proposal will be more elaborate." "When?" when I can plan something worthy of you and our children. Helen took his hand. Ethan, I don't need a huge party or an expensive ring. I just need you, us. I know, but I want to do it right this time. I want it to be special. It's already special. We have 3 beautiful, healthy toddlers. We have a family that supports us. We have a house full of love. What could be more special than that? Ethan looked at the estate where he had grown up, where he was now raising his own children, where he had learned what home truly meant. You're right, he said. We already have everything. So why wait? Ethan looked at her. Helen Carter, will you marry me? Just like that? Here in the garden? No ring, no ceremony? Here in the garden where we met, where you redesigned not just the plants, but my entire life. Helen smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Ethan Montgomery Cole, I will marry you. They kissed again, sealing a promise they both knew they would keep. 3 months later, in December, exactly 1 year after that life-changing Christmas night, Ethan and Helen were married in a simple ceremony in the estate's own chapel. The triplets, now 18 months old and much more active, served as the official wedding party. Even though Michael tried to eat the rose petals, Beatrice crawled down the aisle in the middle of the music, and Lucy slept in Lucy's arms through the entire ceremony. Robert, who had transformed into the world's most doting grandfather, was the one who walked Helen down the aisle. It was a symbolic gesture. The Montgomery Cole family had embraced Helen not just as a daughter-in-law, but as a daughter. Who gives this woman to be married? The minister asked. The entire Montgomery Cole family, Robert answered with pride, and especially 3 children who already consider her the best mother in the world. During their vows, Ethan spoke of second chances, and how true love isn't the kind that never faces hardship, but the kind that survives it and becomes stronger. Helen spoke of forgiveness, of how real love included the courage to allow oneself to be vulnerable again, even after being hurt. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, 3 toddlers clapped, Michael with enthusiasm, Beatrice confused by the noise, and Lucy with a mischievous grin as if she knew everything was going exactly as it should. The wedding reception was small and intimate, just family and close friends, with simple decorations and live music. But it was perfect because it was real, built on a solid foundation and not on romantic fantasies. During the first dance, Ethan whispered, in Helen's ear, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for being worthy of it," she whispered back. 2 years later, the Montgomery Cole family had settled into a happy, chaotic routine. Ethan had reorganized his career to allow for more flexibility. He still ran the family business, but he had delegated long trips to his partners and focused on projects he could manage mostly from home or his Denver office, which he visited only twice a week. Helen had expanded her landscape architecture firm and now had a team of 6 employees serving clients throughout Colorado. She had also started a blog about motherhood and career that had become surprisingly popular. The triplets, now 3 and a half, were 3 completely distinct personalities. Michael had become the family intellectual, preferring books and puzzles to physical play. Beatrice was athletic and fearless, always climbing trees and inventing dangerous adventures. Lucy remained the diplomat, mediating conflicts between her siblings and demonstrating an emotional intelligence that was impressive for her age. The Montgomery estate had become the center of constant family gatherings. Caroline had gotten married and was pregnant with her first child. Robert had officially retired to dedicate himself to his grandchildren full-time. Lucy ran a volunteer group of grandmothers at a local children's home, using all the experience she had gained with the triplets. One Thursday evening, after putting the children to bed, Ethan and Helen sat on the veranda as they did every night. It was a ritual they had developed, 10 minutes just for the 2 of them, talking about their day, making plans, simply enjoying each other's company. "Do you regret anything?" Helen asked, as she sometimes did. "Taking so long to grow up," Ethan answered, as he always did. "And you?" "Not telling you about the pregnancy right away," she said. "Maybe if I had—" "It wouldn't have changed anything," Ethan interrupted. I wasn't ready to be a father then. I needed to run away before I could come back and stay. Do you think it was all necessary? The separation, the time alone, all the pain?" Ethan considered the question, as he always did. It was something they explored regularly, whether the painful path had been necessary to get them where they were. "I think it made us stronger," he said finally, "both individually and as a couple. You became an incredible mother because you had to learn on your own. I became a better father because I had to earn my place, and our marriage is solid because it was built on conscious choices, not just passion. What if you had never come back for that Christmas? But I did, and even if I hadn't, somehow I would have found out about them and come running back. Destiny always finds a way." Helen laughed. "Destiny? Since when do you believe in destiny?" "Since I saw 3 babies who looked at me like they knew I was their father. Since I realized that everything in my life had led me to that room on that night, at that exact moment. That's a beautiful way of looking at it. It's the only way, because if I believe it was just coincidence or luck, I'll spend the rest of my life afraid of losing it all again." Helen took his hand, playing with the wedding band he never took off. "You won't. No matter what happens, you will always be their father, and you will always be the man who chose to stay when he could have left." Ethan kissed her softly, thinking how strange it was that the best phase of his life had begun with the biggest mistake he had ever made. "I love you, Helen Cole. I love you too, Ethan Cole. Forever." Forever is a long time, not long enough. From upstairs came the familiar sound of one of the triplets calling for water, immediately followed by the other 2 asking for the same thing. Helen sighed and started to get up. "My turn," Ethan said, stopping her. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Go take a relaxing bath. I'll handle the collective nightly thirst." Ethan went upstairs to attend to his children, smiling as he heard the 3 different voices. Michael scientifically explaining why he needed water, Beatrice demanding water that was cold but not too cold, and Lucy simply repeating, "Water, Daddy, water." When he returned to their room 40 minutes later, because giving water to 3 3-year-olds invariably turned into a complex operation involving stories, songs, and negotiations about how many sips each could take, he found Helen asleep in their bed. She was sleeping with a half smile, her hair spread across the pillow, one hand resting on her stomach as if protecting something precious. Ethan lay down beside her carefully, pulling the covers over them both. He spent a few minutes just watching her sleep, thinking how lucky he was to wake up next to her every day. Outside, Aspen slept under a starry sky. The Montgomery estate was quiet, but it was the silence of a house full of love. 3 children sleeping safely in their rooms, proud grandparents dreaming of their grandchildren, and 2 adults who had learned that true love isn't the kind that never weathers a storm, but the kind that learns to dance in the rain. Ethan closed his eyes and smiled, knowing that when he woke up in the morning, everything would be exactly where it should be. Helen by his side, 3 healthy children wanting breakfast, and a family that had been built not just on love, but on the daily choices of presence, commitment, and mutual growth. It was everything a man could want. It was more than he had ever imagined he deserved, and it was just the beginning of a story that still had decades left to be written. In the silence of the night, Ethan made one last silent promise, not just to Helen or his children but to himself. No matter what the future held, he would be present for every moment, for every joy, every challenge, every discovery, every change, because he had learned that love isn't a feeling you have. It's a choice you make every single day for the rest of your life. And Ethan Montgomery Cole had chosen forever.